Hello, hello. Welcome to Death and All the Rest, a podcast where we talk about life, death, and everything in between. Today, Chris, I've been thinking.
Okay.
I was thinking about, I think it was actually like our first or second episode, but you made this really quick connection to having at one point been, I think you said like anti-nihilist or
Mm-hmm.
sorry, it's natalist.
Yes.
You did say nihilist too, but anti-natalist is the one I'm referring to. Both
Probably,
of
yeah,
these
that's me.
things. But like it had me thinking because we know each other and we're both, I mean, fully formed adults, fully formed brains. We have decisions and we both have made decisions at this point in our life that we are child free.
Correct.
And I think that's interesting to talk about because this is getting more and more normalized in society for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There are people opting out of parenthood and having children, but it's not the norm. And I thought that this is just something that we could talk about because I see so many ways that this relates to existentialism, and I'm sure that you do too. But
Yes.
you know, in the sake of what we do on this podcast, talk about the things that like people don't always feel comfortable talking about, don't always feel safe talking about. Like, let's fucking open it up and talk about it.
I mean, this may be the most charged question there is. A rejection of your contribution to humanity, a rejection of the biological imperative, and all that weight of the centuries, thousands of millennia of human procreation and quote unquote your responsibility to society. And yet, we know globally fertility rates are plummeting in most developed countries. Um, and it's not just pure selfishness and people are just don't want to have kids. People are coming to this conclusion to not have children for a number of reasons. Um, and I think personally, I think it has a very great deal to do with income inequality. It's incredibly expensive to raise children now.
Sure.
Um, Also, it locks you into a life that you may not have control over. And um, I think that there is a sense of, is it all worth it? That's a heavy thing to say, but um,
Yeah.
this world is getting uglier, it seems. And existential dread of not just our own individual lives, but the human race. And what kind of world are we bringing, potentially, if we choose to, children into? And are we doing them a disservice? Do we have that right? And I think some people think about this and come to the conclusion that it doesn't meet their values and it doesn't feel right. And they make a conscious decision not to have children. And um, I came to that myself in a strange, not strange, but through my own predicament of life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
being addiction and spending the greater part of my life heavily addicted to alcohol. And I felt like I missed my window, frankly, to have kids. And I fought it through and I sat down with it and I went through a grief process and I determined I'm not going to do it if the opportunity came up.
Chris, can I
And
ask you
that's,
something?
shoot.
How you said you felt like you missed your window. How old were you when you came out on the other end of the addiction stuff? Like what age were you when you were having this thought about like I missed my window and now I've got to grieve this reality?
I was 42, 43,
Okay.
and I was concerned that, I wouldn't be healthy enough to raise a child. Not just getting older, but frankly, I wasn't sure if I was going to die young
Yeah.
because of the abuse, because of the damage to my health. and I've done a great deal of work to get my health back, and I've been lucky or privileged that I'm not in worse shape than I am.
Did you
Uh,
opt out of having kids on purpose during your active addiction? Because, like you mentioned before, that you purposefully were not really involved in relationships and stuff because you at least knew that on the other side of that, like, you wouldn't have been a good partner at that time. But like, it's not like par for the course for someone dealing with addiction to like make those kinds of choices all the time, right? So like, was this part of the choice that you were making with your addiction of like, I'm not going to have kids? Because like, at some point you didn't miss a window, right? Like, you were in the window there. I mean, technically as a man you still haven't even missed a window, but like, still in terms of like how old you'd be if you had a kid now, whatever. But like, yeah, like, was that a conscious choice that you were making throughout addiction, that like, I'm not going to have children?
it became that. I think I was messed up much earlier than I realized, and I thought I was still like having a fun time
Yeah.
and just not taking things serious, you know, and young, plenty
Yeah.
of time. But I was already kookaburra. And as I got deeper in, and I realized, oh, I'm trouble. Um, I didn't want to inflict. That's how the words I used. I didn't want to inflict that on a woman, on a
Yeah.
partner. I'm well read enough, even back then, educated on this stuff to know the damage that can be done in a relationship where one person is a out of control addict.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to make that connection with children. I just I take that very serious. I didn't want to hurt other people, even though my addiction was hurting other people.
Mm-hmm.
That was the choice that I made. The flip side of that, the really ugly part of that, is if I look at myself and I look at that time, I just chose the alcohol.
Mm.
I have to like I have to see that side of it
Yeah.
because I did because I loved the booze
Yeah.
and that was I don't spend a lot of time with regret
Mm-hmm.
because when I got healthy and I got my act together and I started to take care of myself and I realized how distorted my perception of reality had been and how sick
Mm-hmm.
I had been. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. If something happened to me in a reaction to some of the things I went through and a certain kind of brain I have and the fact that I practiced it so long. But that one stings still.
Mm-hmm.
I can't. I grieved it, but I can't quite. Uh, it does creep in a little bit from time to time, and yet I
Mm-hmm.
think I made the right decision. I stand by my decision, and I will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I don't know. This is a huge question,
Yeah.
and it's charged. Um, what are your thoughts? How did you come to this?
Yeah. And I think, beyond everything that you're talking about, like the societal obligation, the biological pull that as humans we feel to procreate, there's also tying it into the existential piece. There's that having kids is our only way, for our only like definitive means of true legacy that's left behind, right? Because like,
Yeah.
generations will continue on. Um and immortality, as we've talked about before, right? This is kind
Yes.
of that means of immortality. So going against that too, this comes up, you strike yourself against this existential conundrum, because it's like, you human nature says we want to extend beyond our lifetime. We want to have some way that we're fossilized to go on, even in a shred of that, right? Like, um so I think what's interesting too is for people opting out, which, speaking for myself, like, I've opted out, is there's a greater fear of something than there is of not being immortalized, not having a legacy left behind. Um, And what is that? Because that's existential too, right? Like that's, and it's to try to water this down to one reason, or even a couple of reasons, I couldn't possibly. But like ultimately, I think there's so many pieces wrapped up in it. What you said for me, and I want to start with like there's no judgment from me for people who have kids. I
Yeah.
think that like that's a personal choice that everybody needs to make for themselves. And I hope that people get to make that choice. And it's not like we've talked about before in other episodes. It's not that just coasting along and this is the direction that you feel like you're supposed to take, because it's how life goes. It's what everybody's always said. It's what everybody else you know does. Like that you're really stopping and thinking about this, because this having kids is a huge decision, and it's not something to be taken lightly. It's not something to just do because it's the status quo and it's that next step of what we do. You do it because you really want this, right? And um, I think for me, like I would much rather regret not having kids than regret having kids. Like
Hmm.
if it comes down to that for me, right? Like because there could be regret either way. It's a coin toss. You don't know how either outcome can actually go until you're living it. But I to put a kid through, there are plenty of people who regret having kids, and that's also very real and very human, and we don't talk about it. And for me, um, there's a lot of the state of the world. We just don't
Hmm.
know what we're handing over to these kids. If we had a kid, if I had a kid right now, 20 years when they're an adult and they're living a life of independence, I don't know what I'm handing over to them, what they're walking into. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, you said something too, like, do we have the right to do that? And the right versus the ability, right? Like we have the ability to do that, but do we have the right, and do we want to do that? And like, and that's something that I take into consideration as far as like thinking about that human that would be coming out of that procreation. Like it results in an actual human being with
Hmm.
consciousness, with cognition. And, you know, for me, life has been a constant state of cognitive dissonance because of existential dread, because of this feeling of like, I would rather have not been here. Uh, if I say this, like if I could have opted in or out before I was born to decide if I wanted to do this, I would have opted out. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's because I really appreciate being here, and that now losing it feels like this terrible injustice that's been done to me. Where if I hadn't had it, I wouldn't know about it. I wouldn't miss it. So there's that
I'm,
aspect.
I'm the total opposite.
I know, but that's the thing, right? Like this is
Yeah.
how that existential dread plays in. It's so different for people.
Yeah.
Um, but there are other reasons too that other people would probably deem a lot more selfish of why I don't want kids. I am in my relationship. I I really value my relationship and my connection with my husband, and I I don't want to sacrifice any element of that, any piece of that. I don't want that to look different. There's a dynamic. I'm not even talking about like sharing the attention, although like let's be real, that's something you're sharing attention when you have kids with your partner at that point.
Sure.
But it's also like the dynamic that changes, because now not only are we consulting about our relationship and our lives, but we're constantly having to parent together and navigating that. And there's a lot of different elements that adds to a relationship that complicates things, and I don't want that. Like my relationship means a lot to me, and I want to just be like, I am happy. I've analyzed this for myself. I'm so happy in my life just being able to be in a relationship with someone where I get to focus on that, on just enjoying us and our relationship. And I get to be selfish and make choices for myself that for another consenting adult don't harbor any impact or effect in negative ways to him that maybe it would on a kid. There's a level of freedom that I get to have that is important to me. And not to say like there's pros and cons to all of it. That's not to say that people who have kids don't have any kind of freedom or anything, but like that's just not a lifestyle that I think when I think about the big picture and I think about being 80 years old looking back on my life, I don't want to feel like I didn't get to live life the way that I wanted because I was, responsible for making sure another human being was taken care of and was learning morals and good ideals and beliefs and things like that. Like, I want to be able to focus on me and make and getting the most out of this life for myself.
You've obviously put a lot of thought into this, and considered it. Do you feel that because, and I'm going to bring this up because it's something I can feel, um, and still feel like the social pressure to the duty to have kids, and maybe even like a sense of being programmed from a young age to procreate and have children, and it's still stinging. And even though you've come to a different conclusion, you've you've actively chosen your own agency and your own course of action,
Mm-hmm.
but you still have that like in the back of your mind. Is that something that you feel?
Are you saying like the societal pressure to do it, or that the societal pressure making me feel like I still should?
Both.
Mm, yeah. Um, the societal pressure for sure, right? There's always societal pressure to feel like that, and I don't think that goes away. But the societal pressure, as far as its impact on me and feeling like I should be doing this, or this is something that like I'm not serving or reaching my full value and worth as a human, as a female specifically, by doing that. No, um, because I have no qualms about being selfish and living for myself and knowing that I've made the best choice for me. So it doesn't do that. Getting to this point though was a lot of that because yeah, I mean, I as a kid, that's what you see, that's what's modeled.
Mm-hmm.
You're a kid. Your parents have opted to have kids, right? And then you're growing up, and everybody's talking about it. One day, the goal is you get a good job, you get married, you have kids, you're doing the things, and um, that was very normalized. And where I grew up, especially, like that was what everybody was doing. Even like early 20s, mid 20s, a lot of my friends were having kids, and pretty much almost all of my friends from back home are parents at this point. And I've been with my husband since I was 21. And even early on in that relationship, we had talked about having kids one day. Like it was a part of the conversation because it was the direction and we didn't question it. Like this is just what we were fed as the agenda. And we thought, like, yeah, one day we'd have kids. We didn't stop to think about whether or not we really would want them or what kind of value that would add or any of that. It was just like, that's just what's done. And then but we had always said like, yeah, we'll have kids one day, not right now, right? Like, maybe in 5 years, maybe in like 5 years, and then 5 years kept getting pushed back, 5 more years, 5 more years, 5 more years, until eventually we were just talking about it. We were getting older. We were almost in our 30s at this point, and it was this very real conversation of like, because I mean, this is just full transparency, but I was on birth control. And I was like, I don't want to be on birth control. There's a lot of side effects and there's a lot of risk being on birth control.
Yeah.
And if I don't need to be on birth control because we know we don't want kids and we could do something more permanent, I'd like to have this conversation. Or if we're thinking like we really do want kids, then I'll stay on birth control to push that off for now. But like, and we had this conversation. Like, I was just like, where are you with wanting kids, and we have lots of nieces and nephews. So we love kids. We both,
Right.
we were like, kids are some of the best people in the world, right? They really are. Like, it's just,
I
there's
agree.
something really, really fun and magical about kids, but it's just not for us. And we had this conversation where we were both like, we don't, not even, it's not like oh, if it doesn't ever happen for us, that would be okay. It was like, I'd actually really rather that not happen for us. Like, I think it would be way more enjoyable of a life for me based on just what I want out of it to not do that. And we were on the same page, luckily, because we started out in a different page. Yeah. And then it was just like, there was this relief, honestly, for me, because there's obviously a lot more entailed for the woman in a heterosexual relationship, because I'd have to carry a baby, which never sounded overly appealing to me. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many risks with pregnancy and stuff, and like I wasn't super gung ho about doing any of that. So there was a lot of relief. There was no grief for me. Um, and that was something. I had hysterectomy, and that was something that I was prepped for. That, I when I was reading about it and talking about it with my doctor and other people who've been through it, they said be prepared for the grief, even though you don't want kids and this is a medical procedure that you need for other reasons. There still can be a wave of grief that kind of hits you, because now it's permanent, right? There's this decision has been made, and now you cannot biologically carry children. And I was like, yeah, so I was ready for it. And after it happened, there was nothing but relief for me, because it was like, now this can't happen. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have
Right.
to ever worry about it again. And I think for me, that just solidified, because there was no, and I know that's like a common thing. Even people who really don't want kids and they make that decision, there's still grief that they can go through with that. I know that, and I didn't. And I think that's where I was like, I know I did the right thing for myself. But what about you though? Because you're saying like the societal impact on you, and as a man, you speak from a different lens than I do.
Um, there's a few things at play with that. For me, first of all, I never wanted to be here, and I never wanted to participate in life. I don't have a lot of faith in the human species, even though I love it at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also believe in absolute freedom. You get to choose what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I just try to look at the bigger picture of the world. There's plenty of people out there. Um, I'm not going to, whether or not I have a child is not going to be the determining factor for the survival of the human race. And I think that's a logical thing to consider.
Sure.
Uh, and um, I would want to be in a position where I could be a good father and take care of that child and provide for that child. At least have the right framework. I understand that there is a sense for some people, and I think this would probably apply to me, that there's
Mm-hmm.
this old saying. I think I don't know if it's in Middle Eastern, but it's an ancient saying that says, "When the child comes, the money comes." In the sense
Mm.
that like people have kids and they find focus and they ground through their children and they become more invested in the human race and making it
Yeah.
a better place because now you have real skin in the game and it ain't yours, but you're responsible for it. And there's a lot of connection and love in that because you created it.
Yeah.
I get that and I respect that.
Mm-hmm. And
Uh,
I think that's real. I think that
oh
like
yeah,
that's a very real thing. And for some people, I think like that's a beautiful reason to be conceptualizing it that way.
yeah, I think so. We want that. I want that.
Yeah.
I want people to feel that way and to kick
Mm-hmm.
in, and it's good to have that. But I think in the variety of the human experience, there's room for that and there's room for me.
Yep. Yep.
And if if I was the man I am now at 20, 21, I would have probably had kids,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't.
Right.
You know, it's just as
Mm-hmm.
simple as that. I don't get to dictate everything, and I made choices along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and did I have to go through all that to be the person I am now? To be able to conceptualize this way, to think about it this way? And if so, I can't time warp. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's kind of out of my hands, you know. And I also think, frankly, that like if I had been that person, I would have never met Alex and never met my partner, and that's a no go for me.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is she's my world. Um, so that's where I ground it. That's my life, and everybody else can go fuck themselves. far as I'm concerned. I don't feel the sting of outside influence, of authoritarian influence, of religion, of anything like that. I don't. Like, it has
Mm-hmm.
very zero effect on me in that regard. And then maybe that some of that is privilege, some of that is being a man, a white man. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think things about things a lot, and I feel very strongly. And this is just the life that I have chosen for myself.
Yeah.
Um, that actually I didn't consciously make all these decisions. Some things I just did, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things I just did. A lot of it was in reaction to how I grew up and my genetics and my environment. And
Yeah.
maybe a lot of the reasons people have kids are the same. So, or not reasons in the sense that they're not conscious of it, they just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
then they've had the kid, and then that forms their analysis and their belief system. And there's room for me, and there's room for them as well. And uh, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
I reject anybody else trying to tell me otherwise because I'm not trying to tell anybody else how to do their thing. Um, and I believe that with the state of the world, that maybe this is, now I'm going big. Maybe this reaction, this loss of fertility is, we used to have a lot of kids because kids died young. And you needed a lot of kids for the farm. You
Mm-hmm.
needed hands to work the farm. And kids wouldn't make it past like 5, 6, 7. And they didn't even used to name kids at a young age because it made it hurt more when you lost them. It
Mm-hmm.
would just be a kid. And then as people become more successful and have more choice, they have less kids, more opportunity, more jobs. It's less stressful. And people just react. We're such adaptable little mammals that
Mm-hmm.
how much of this is choice? How much of this is decision? How much of this is reaction to the circumstances? I don't know. So maybe this is our like corrective action as a species. Maybe there's too many of us. They say there's plenty of food to feed everybody on this planet, but maybe there's too many people for us to get our shit together.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe things are going to get so chaotic because of climate change and population growth and pollution that we are facing collapse. And maybe we need a controlled collapse and less mouths to feed. And this is just leading into that. I don't know, man. Sometimes I think of the human race as a virus. And we just go. We just do things. We just all react like we're all just different neurons in this giant brain. And I don't know. So I don't have the answers for the world, but I don't believe in dictating to other people this choice. And it's a very serious choice. And sometimes it just happens. So I don't know. That's a little bit much, but I think that's fair.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your ability to hold the duality for yourself in this of like, there's this very real, you know, if I was who I am now, I probably would have had kids if I was this person that many years ago. But like as it stands, I had to go through all of that to get to this version of myself that I am. And at this point, like kids are just not in the cards. It's outside of the
Yeah.
window of where I'd want to do that. And um but I think being able to recognize that there's a level of acceptance for like this is the reality and checking into that. But there's also you're leaving room for the grief, or you've left room for the grief and the loss surrounding that of like this isn't something that I would have rejected in every circumstance, in any version of how this could have played out for me. If this could have played out differently, this wouldn't have been the outcome potentially. But like there's grief in that and acknowledging that for yourself. I think that that's a really um that can put a lot of people in a state of cognitive dissonance. This
Yeah.
like how do I rationalize these opposing truths for myself, right? Like and being able to hold that at the same time and acknowledge that duality and say like this is how it is and this is how the circumstances played out for me, and it's been worth it to have this version of myself. And I'm sad for the version
Yeah.
of myself that didn't get to do this earlier and didn't get to have kids as part of that experience. I just think that that's a really, I just think that that's a really beautiful way for your brain to be able to give yourself that acknowledgement and recognition of
Yeah.
all of it, of holding all of it, all sides of it.
Yeah, I got plenty of sadness. um, some people react to this, to what you just said, and to
Yeah.
what I've said, with a lot of anger
Mhm.
and accusations. And I think if I was to project myself back, or a person, a young man similar to myself, because I think about this a lot too, the youngest generation. I don't necessarily fully believe in the concept of generations, but the youngest cohort of people, they're at risk of a lot of bad, of mental strife, just
Mhm.
cognitive dissonance, because they're coming in this world and they're like, well, fuck, you guys blew it before us.
Yeah.
And it's going to land on us, and we're going to have to be the young ones living through this. And
Mhm.
you're not even going to kick in and have kids. You're opting out, or they have apathy about it, or whatever. But I could see, I have seen, it's out there. I've seen people behave this way, where they're just angry at people who choose not to have children.
Yeah. I
And
think that's a really common response,
yeah,
not from the majority by any means, but I think that's a common response. And I think that's, um, for myself, I haven't been in the dating world in a long time and haven't really been in the dating world much as an adult. But like, I think that that complicates the dating scene for a lot of people because there are people who recognize that like there's a huge incompatibility if I want kids and you don't want kids or vice versa. So people are trying to be really forthcoming about that out the gate, on dating apps and things like that. And they're putting this information out there because they're like, hey, I want to be respectful of your time. I don't want you to even match with me if you want kids, knowing that I don't. I just want to be respectful of both of our time and our goals. And I've known women who have been on these dating apps and they put this in there in their bios just to make that front and center. And then these responses that they'll get from men on the other side, men will match with them to heckle them and to talk shit to them about how what kind of woman are they and they're not fulfilling their purpose and all kinds of things. And then really they get nasty into like the you're ugly who'd want to procreate with you or like whatever. But like it is this hostility and this volatile way that people see that it's almost an affront to them somehow. And like that, see, it's this, they see the human condition and the human path as one directional and everybody should be doing this thing, and if you're not, you're like fucking it up for the rest of us or something. I'm not sure where this collective mindset comes in that like someone making a decision for themselves, like no one's asking you to be with this woman. She's not asking you to be with her. If you want kids, she's saying go for it. I'm not the one, but somehow that's a personal offense, and it's really interesting because um it makes it harder for people to be forthcoming about that.
I think that's fear. I think that's fear turning into anger,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's insecurity. Um, and I think you actually hit the nail on the head in an interesting way. Like, for some of these people, some of these guys, um,
Mm-hmm.
feeling like the human condition is breaking down. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the all of the norms, all of the rules, all of the roles, um, and then what have you? You got slop. And what are they supposed to do? It just goes back to what I was saying. I think that what a mess they've been handed, in one sense, you know.
Yeah.
It's one
Mm-hmm.
that is a, I think, a very um, not necessarily logical or illogical, but a very normal reaction to the current state of affairs is to feel that. I'm not saying I don't think it's good. I don't think it's positive or useful. Um, but I think that's an emotional reaction, and
Sure.
not to, and probably the better course of action is not to aggress from that place, but it's to look at yourself and say, why am I feeling this way? How did
Totally.
I get to
It's
this?
yeah, and there's this interesting like juxtaposition that comes out of that, right? Because on it's like um this concern, this fear, this insecurity, this hope for like the collective, the human collective that's coming from, but also at the cost of the human collective, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like othering people by making
yeah.
a choice for themselves, and now you've othered yourself, so like we've effectively like undone the collective at because we're doing for the collective.
You've contributed to the exact condition that you're railing against.
Yeah.
That that emotional distress. That's that. I mean, that is a big deal. That's what we're dealing with in a very big sense. It's this
Sure.
this increasing division, this increasing polarization, and the shattering of community into like all these fragmented little pieces where we all feel isolated, but we're all watching each other all the time. It's just all everybody's a professional critic now, and we're just pissed. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody's just angry about this stuff, and we're very spun up. And maybe with the way that we interact now, where the commons is online, and our attention spans have decreased so dramatically, all that's left is impulsivity
Mm-hmm.
and and rage bait, and we're teaching ourselves to be little angry, pissed off monkeys. Um, yeah, that's not going to get us anywhere. That's
Yeah.
not good.
It is something that we've actually I was gonna say we've done to ourselves, but we haven't done it to ourselves. They've done it to us, and they um in this where I'm talking about this is the technology industry really, but we've talked about this
Mm-hmm.
in a previous episode, the sense of like comparison to ourselves of other people. We see other people's highlight reels versus our behind the
Yeah,
scenes, and we're comparing, and then we're not having conversations because we feel so abnormal and so like our experience is so far away from what other people are experiencing. And on the flip
behind.
side of that, or behind, and on the flip side of that, though, too, there's this other phenomenon happening with the internet and this level of connectivity that we have in a way that we've never had before, where like people um, are over relating and
Yeah,
to what they're seeing, and then they start to over normalize their own experience as a result. So because they're like, oh, I relate to this person so much, and I like we probably have all these different things in common now because I see this talk about this thing and I agree with that. We're on the same page, and then we over normalize our experience and we lose the nuance of our own journeys of ourselves, and we turn into this collective blob, right? Because
yeah,
now we're not having conversations even in that realm. We're not having conversations about any of the stuff that we're going through, the thoughts that we're having, because we're assuming everybody else is having them too. So on either side of this spectrum, there's isolation happening as a result because we're not talking about it either out of fear, insecurity of rejection, embarrassment, um, being labeled other, or we just assume everybody's been through it and there's nothing unique about what we've gone through. Why would we talk about it? And we're losing so much in that, so much of our own self exploration, awareness, and then there's connection being lost in that.
yeah. That just made me have a thought. Like we're forming like new groups and new group identities because of the online sphere, and they don't really work as so well in the real world to navigate all the decisions that we have to make in the relationships that we have. So we
Yeah.
creating like two separate lives and then trying to slam them together. Um, that's a bigger question I'm ready to tackle with right now. But uh, I think that um, a lot of this is missing community and missing like one-on-one connections
Mm-hmm.
because there are guys and girls and everywhere out there and everything in between, and you can go out there and find them. You can, I always have this thought, like, because I know kids from what I've heard from the few that I've talked to that they have problems dating now. It's
Mm-hmm.
difficult, and they're interacting on these phones, and they're just sending themselves ab shots or whatever, and just like going straight to sex or not knowing how to flirt, which involves all kinds of complicated social interactions and gut checks and dealing with awkwardness and
Yeah.
rejection. And but I have this really powerful belief that if you just gave me 50 guys and 50 girls the same age and everything in between, and you just gave them to me and say, take these kids out and take care of them, they'd all pair off in different ways. At least a lot of them. I take them out and put them on the track and just say, okay, everybody's gonna walk 5 miles. Just walk whatever your pace, 5 miles, whatever that's 20 laps, you, and people will pair off and have relationships and build little communities and little cliques. And somebody's probably going to fall in love, and probably I guarantee you somebody's going to have sex. So we're not that special, and it's not that complicated. We've overcomplicated all this shit. Um,
Mm.
and real life is out there. It's not here, even though we're having a very real discussion, and it can be here, but we know enough, and we know each other well enough. We take this outside as well. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but that's I fear is spending too much into this space in this realm, especially for them when they need to be developing this stuff and seeing the reality, like and like basically kind of slamming into each other a little bit from time to time, and having real relationships and realizing that there's growth, that like it takes work. You learn how to be. I have this very strong sense that you have to learn how to be good and to have healthy, loyal relationships. You have to learn values. You
Yeah.
do get some instilled, and you get this some given to you by your faith, if you have one, and that kind of thing, in your community. But they're practical, and they need to be tested. And you kind of learn it. If you act like a dick in the real world, you ain't getting any. Or you're
Yeah.
going to get
This is
punched
part
in
of
the
the
face.
identity.
Yes.
It's part of the identity development that we've talked about too. Like, yeah, you have some morals and values instilled in you, but you also get to pick and choose what sticks and what you want to drop off and acquire your own over time. But that is through exposure. And I think like
Yeah.
we're talking about these issues of less connection, more connection and less connection at the same time, right? And I think that social media, internet has its place. It's cool. It serves its purpose. It bridges these gaps. Cool. I love that. And like just making sure that we're not taking on this societal view that like vulnerability is weakness. That's how it's framed so often. And
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability in our relationships beyond calculated vulnerability, because like the stuff people are posting online, even that people are relating to and over relating to in some senses, is like they might be posting something very vulnerable, very real, but it's calculated. Still, it's this like
Yeah.
level of I've decided that I'm comfortable posting this content and I'm going to post it. And so I think for people listening, they're like, cool, you guys have named the problem, but like what do we do about it? And I think it's like it's easier said than done, because
Yes.
it's a lot of that like in theory this all makes sense, but like finding ways to connect with people, finding safe people, curating relationships that allow for vulnerability, that don't have judgment or ridicule if you open up about some of the things that are maybe harder to say out loud to people. And sometimes, like, it's okay. That might need to start with a professional, right? Like, that is a state you go into this place and you know it is this person's job to hear me, to not judge me, to listen to me, to come with
Mm-hmm.
compassion and empathy for me. And because there's a lot of social conditioning around weakness, about resilience, about being able to just like keep trudging through, that we do develop this armor as a result of making sure that we can conform and that we can keep on marching like everybody else is doing. So, like, there is some dismantling that may have to happen for that. And that's okay if that has to happen in a professional space to start. And then maybe you start identifying, is there one relationship that you have that feels safe enough to do that? And you open something up. But like, I think just really finding the spaces and the people and the points where you can allow for that vulnerability and know that that's forging deeper connection, that that's letting you be yourself, to genuinely be yourself, and that you don't have to hide that all the time. And that doesn't, like, none of us has to go out and have vulnerability with every person we interact with in every circumstance. That's insane, right? Like, that's not safe.
No,
That would not be
no.
safe. But you do want to have that where you're not feeling like every single thing that is vulnerable, the dark thoughts, the good, the bad, messy, like all of that stuff, where you feel like you can't say it out loud to anybody. And now you're holding it all in, thinking that there's something wrong with you because of that. And now it's like, and then that starts to eat away at your self concept and the way that your self-esteem, your confidence, the way that you engage in the world, and even more for there's difficulty around connection because you can't actually, you feel so far away from other people. So like, my big thing to listeners around this is, um, find places, find people where it's safe to be yourself, unapologetically yourself, where you can talk and have vulnerability. And if that starts in the professional realm with a therapist, a coach, great. Start somewhere, but figure out a way to be able to like say the things that you're worried about being so other, and getting comfortable saying that to somebody. Find a safe place.
Yeah. Otherwise, you kind of, I don't know if you're going to default, but a very likely response is just it's a zero sum life, and
Yeah.
it's all aggression and all competition and how much control you can. If we're all against one each other and God against all of us all the time, then it's just war.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's not the world that we want. That's not the world that anybody really truly wants, I believe. It doesn't get us anywhere. We will not make it.
Mm-mm.
And if you feel that, if you feel that anger, and I did, man, I did for 15, 20 years, just bitter and angry and competitive. And sometimes that made me feel powerful. And I always
Mm-hmm.
was pissed at somebody. You know, often, obvious, a lot of times myself, but the rest, other people too. I had plenty of anger for
Mm-hmm.
everybody. Um, it just sucked. It wasn't
Yeah.
the world I wanted to be in. And when I started to let go of some of that, um, let go of that tension, that aggression about everything, all of a sudden things started to come to me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's when
Mm-hmm.
I quit being a prick, started taking care of myself, got sober, just quit being. I literally said, I'm fucking sick and tired of being angry all the time. At one
Mm-hmm.
point, I remember saying that to a friend of mine, and just started like taking care of myself and doing the things that I needed to do to have a life that I could be proud of in myself, a decent life. Then I got the girl, and I
Mm-hmm.
started building the life that I wanted, and it's
Yeah.
10 times better, man. And I started
Mm-hmm.
having more empathy for other people, and instead of having this black and white, nihilistic, completely view of the world, um, I have there's more space. I have more. I'm open to more possibility and other people's possibilities and a sense of mystery and even like crazy enough for me like a sense of hope and possibility. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a lot less destructive. That's for damn sure. So think about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, at the core of it, if you strip everything else away, if you strip all of the like cultural, societal things that we've adapted to as far as like work pressures and the having to pay rent and do all these things, like if you strip it all of that away and go down to the basics of humanity, we crave connection. We are
Yes.
social creatures, and that it like and that's when everything else is hard. Like we're in a weird time right now. We're living in this time of uncertainty. People are scared. People don't know where this is going. But if you can lean into connection with other people and focus on having a really good support system, having people that you feel joy around, that you take pleasure in being with, that goes a long way. It doesn't solve everything, but it goes a long way to what you were just saying, right? It gives you hope. It gives you this sense of belonging, and like that's focusing on things that are in our control in these circumstances.
Yeah. And look at that connection. And if that connection is based on destroying somebody else or hating somebody else, that's not a healthy connection. It should it
It's not.
should
Yeah.
it should nourish you, and
Yes.
it should make you stronger, and you should, as a man, I think it should activate the part of you uh, that feels a sense of protectiveness and duty and loyalty and care. It should activate the part of you that wants to be a dad and
I think,
and wants to love your partner.
yeah, and there's this saying that I've taken in as one of my favorite things to say, but like evaluate your relationships, evaluate everything you're doing by this criteria. If it no longer serves you, grows you, or makes you happy, figure out a way to cut it out. Because that's really where everything, like that's the bottom line. We want things to be serving a purpose for us and providing meaning. And like if a relationship is caught up in, like you said, like cutting other people down or doing things that hurt other people, that's not growing you. That's not serving you. That's not really making you happy. Like you're unhappy. You're doing that out of not being happy. But like think about, so like yeah, kind of evaluate your relationships to that criteria to make sure that they're also relationships that you want to have. Like because there are plenty of relationships that we have that operate in ways that maybe aren't in line with how we want them to be. So don't be afraid to evaluate your relationships too and see how they fit into what it is that you actually want.
That's a grounded, useful metric, you know, instead of
Mm-hmm.
like just being angry at the world and being destructive, because that's quick and it's there,
Mm-hmm.
and we can see it. We can see it happening in this world, and we're just not going to make it that way. I don't think so.
No.
It's going to continue to
And
break.
we're not gonna be happy making it
No,
that way either. It's just not fulfilling that very innate need that we have as humans. And that's what we got to remember. Like at the end of the day, beyond everything else, we are humans. And the thing that we relate to most, the two things that we relate to most, I'll say, survival, connection.
yeah. I mean, that's it. That sums it up pretty well. And you want them to be healthy, you know,
Yes. Yes.
a healthy survival, thriving,
Mm-hmm.
and a good steward of the world, and healthy connection, um, supportive, um, strengthening, binding. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if we got our act together, we'll make it out of this period. You know, if
Yep.
we're all tearing at each other, uh, our chances of making are going to plummet. It's going to be much much harder. And the people who grow up in this time, it's going to be their crucible, and they're going to have to like to a very great extent determine what that looks like.
Yeah.
Don't
Yep.
go into it screaming and flinging shit. It's not going to help. I'm using a lot of monkey metaphors. I think about that. We're just a bunch of freaking monkeys.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this is a good ending point.
I agree. I would like to thank everybody for, being with us and listening and watching this podcast. I appreciate your time listening to us. And I think you should listen to yourself a little bit more and be kind and graceful to yourself and others and build community and consider these existential questions with logic and heart and good purpose. And have at it. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next time.